It was Christmas Eve, the kind of evening when snow glows faintly under the streetlights. Children's laughter echoes from cozy homes, and the air carries that unmistakable scent of cinnamon, pine, and anticipation. But for me, that night was nothing short of exile. I stood outside my own home, shivering, holding a small bag of groceries and a heart full of disbelief. The door that had once opened for me with warmth and love now remained tightly shut. My daughter-in-law's words still burned in my ears. "You're not welcome here tonight." For a long moment, I just stared at the wreath hanging on the front door. I had made it myself a few days ago, with ribbons, pine cones, and a touch of gold paint. I remember she had rolled her eyes at it, saying it looked too old-fashioned. But I had smiled then, brushing it off, thinking maybe she just didn't like traditions the way I did. That night, though, I realized it wasn't about the wreath. It was about me. Inside, I could hear faint laughter. Her laughter, my son's, and my 2 little grandchildren's. My heart clenched. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just lost. How had I become a stranger to the very home I helped build? My mind replayed the last few weeks like a movie. Ever since Daniel, my son, got married to Clara, things had changed. She was beautiful, ambitious, and confident, the kind of woman who filled every room she entered. But her confidence often came with sharp edges. At first, I ignored the snide comments about my clothes, my habits, my small-town mindset. But lately, she had become bolder. She'd start whispering when I entered the room, changing topics mid-sentence, or sighing loudly when I tried to help with the kids. 2 days ago, she had told Daniel that having me around for Christmas made her anxious. She wanted to host a modern dinner party with her friends and didn't want an old lady fussing over the gravy. Daniel, caught between guilt and loyalty, had mumbled something about maybe celebrating together the next day. But I knew what that meant, not this year. And so, here I was, on Christmas Eve, standing outside my own home while they laughed inside. I could have knocked. I could have called Daniel. But something in me stopped. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the realization that love shouldn't have to beg for a seat at the table. I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from my cheeks, and turned away. My little apartment across town was cold and empty. The heat had broken last week, and the landlord promised to fix it after the holidays. I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching the snow fall. My fingers trembled as I picked up the photo frame from the table. Daniel at 5 years old, holding a snowman we had built together. His smile back then was pure, full of trust. What happened to that boy who once said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you forever"? I closed my eyes and whispered, "Merry Christmas, my son." The next morning, I woke up to silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your soul like frost. I made myself tea, stared at the small artificial tree I decorated alone, and decided something quietly, firmly, unshakably. This would be the last time anyone locked me out of my own story. I didn't plan revenge that morning. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was something colder, deeper, a quiet determination that grew from years of being taken for granted. I decided to give them exactly what they wanted: distance. But not the kind they expected. Daniel and Clara lived in the house that my late husband and I had built 30 years ago. When my husband passed, I couldn't bear to live there alone. So I moved out and let Daniel have it, on one condition: my name remained on the deed. It wasn't about ownership. It was about safety, legacy, respect. But over time, they forgot that part. They forgot it was still my home, legally and emotionally. 2 days later, while they were probably still unwrapping gifts and taking family photos, I went to the bank. I reviewed the documents. I spoke to a lawyer. Quietly, calmly, carefully. By New Year's Eve, I had made up my mind. They had treated me like an inconvenience, so I would simply remove the convenience. I transferred the property deed, not to them, but to a community foundation that builds homes for struggling single mothers. My late husband had always believed in giving back. This, I decided, would be his legacy. A week later, I received a call from Daniel. His voice was cheerful at first. until it wasn't. "Mom," he began, "we just got a notice about the house. Something about ownership transfer? Must be a mistake, right?" I didn't lie. "No mistake, Daniel. It's all correct." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then his tone changed. Disbelief, panic, then anger. "You can't do this. This is our home." I spoke softly, almost whispering. "It was our home, but you made it clear that I didn't belong there anymore. So I found others who might need it more." He cursed. Clara shouted something in the background. Something about "how dare she" and "this is insane." I let them talk. When they were done, I said one last thing. "You locked me out on Christmas Eve. I just returned the favor, permanently." I hung up. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. But the story didn't end there. 3 weeks later, the local newspaper ran a feature about the foundation. They published photos, smiling mothers holding keys to new homes. In the background, one could faintly see the old oak tree that stood in front of Daniel's house. My house. When Daniel saw it, he called again. This time, his voice wasn't angry. It was broken. "Mom," he said quietly, "we're sorry. We didn't think—" "No," I interrupted gently. "You didn't feel." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Can we talk, please?" For a moment, I hesitated. Maybe there was room for forgiveness someday, but not today. Some lessons are best learned through silence. That winter, as snow fell again outside my window, I realized something profound. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go and watching those who took you for granted finally understand the weight of your absence. And in that silence, I finally felt peace. The following days were a blur of emotions. I tried not to think about Daniel and Clara, but every time I passed by a toy store or saw a family walking hand in hand, a dull ache would rise in my chest. The truth was, I didn't hate them. I couldn't. They were still my family, even after all that had happened. But there was something inside me that had shifted, a line that could never be uncrossed. I spent my mornings volunteering at the same community foundation I had donated the house to. It felt strange at first, sorting donations, wrapping gifts for kids, serving warm meals. But slowly I began to see faces that reminded me of my younger self. Women who had lost everything but still smiled. Mothers who held their children tightly even when they had nothing else. It was humbling, healing even. One afternoon, I met a young woman named Sarah. She had 2 children and had just moved into the house that once belonged to me. I didn't tell her that, of course. I simply listened as she told me how this new home had given her a second chance. "We've been through shelters and cramped motels," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "This is the first time my kids have their own room." Her gratitude struck something deep inside me. The same walls that once echoed with cold silence were now filled with laughter again. Not mine, but still beautiful. Life had come full circle. That night, as I walked home under the dim winter sky, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Mom, can we come see you tomorrow?" I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend it never came. But another part, the mother in me, whispered, "Give him one chance." So I typed back, "Yes, come at noon." The next day, the knock came right on time. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there, his eyes sunken and tired. Clara was behind him, clutching the kids' hands. For a brief second, seeing my grandchildren made my heart soften. They ran toward me, wrapping their small arms around my legs. "Grandma, we missed you," they chirped. I knelt and hugged them tightly, inhaling the innocent scent of their hair, a mix of shampoo and sugar cookies. "I missed you too, my loves." Daniel stepped forward. "Mom, I don't know how to start." "Start with honesty," I said quietly, motioning for them to sit. He took a deep breath. "You were right. We were wrong. I let Clara's pride and my own ambition blind me. I forgot everything you and Dad did for me. I forgot what real love looks like." His voice cracked. When the house was gone, I was furious. But then I realized it wasn't the house I missed. It was you. Clara looked away, her lips trembling. "I said horrible things to you." and I can't take them back. I thought you were interfering, but now I see you were just trying to help." There was sincerity in her voice, hesitant, fragile, but real. I studied her face for a moment. She looked smaller somehow, humbled. The sharpness I once saw had softened. "I don't hate you, Clara," I said gently, "but I needed you both to understand that love doesn't mean being invisible. Respect isn't optional." She nodded, tears falling silently. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that carries both pain and peace. The kids played on the floor with a few toys I kept in a box by the couch. Their laughter filled the small apartment, making the space feel alive again. Finally, Daniel spoke. "We're renting a small place now. It's not much, but we're learning. We're trying to build something on our own." I smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe that's what you needed, to know what it means to build, not just inherit." He looked down, ashamed but grateful. After they left, I sat quietly, sipping my tea. A strange calm washed over me. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that save us. But the peace didn't last long. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, a formal notice. Daniel and Clara were filing a legal appeal to challenge the transfer of the house. My hands trembled as I read it. So that's what their apology had been. Not repentance, but preparation. For a moment, I felt the old pain rise again. Betrayal, layered on betrayal. But this time, I didn't cry. Instead, I called my lawyer, Mr. Hendricks. He was an old friend of my husband's and had been helping me handle everything quietly. "Don't worry, Margaret," he said after reviewing the papers. "They don't have a case. The house was yours to give. You did everything legally. If they push this, they'll only embarrass themselves." I sighed. "It's not about court, Hendricks. It's about family. I thought we were healing." He paused. "Maybe they're just scared. Sometimes people lash out when they realize they've lost control." He was right. That night, I sat by the window again, staring at the snow. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt tired. How many times does a mother have to forgive before she's allowed to rest? The following week, Daniel called again. His tone was desperate. "Mom, please, I didn't want to file anything. Clara thought maybe—" "Stop," I interrupted. "Daniel, listen to me. Every choice has consequences. You can't treat people like placeholders and expect them to stay." He was silent. Then he whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." "You start by living differently," I said softly. "You don't fix it with words. You fix it with time." We hung up, and I realized something. I no longer needed closure. The story had already written itself. Spring came early that year. The snow melted into soft puddles, and the city slowly came alive again. I walked through the park one morning and saw families having picnics, children chasing pigeons, couples laughing. For the first time, I didn't feel left out. I felt free. A few months later, the foundation invited me to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony for another new home they had built using part of my donation. I stood among smiling faces, listening to a single mother give a speech about how she never believed kindness could still exist in the world. Her words filled the air with something I hadn't felt in a long time: pride. When she cut the ribbon, a gust of wind carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming flowers. It felt like a sign, new beginnings. And just as I was about to leave, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Mom?" I turned. Daniel stood there, holding a bouquet of daisies, my favorite. Clara was beside him, quieter this time, humbled by months of struggle. He looked at me, his eyes wet. "We didn't come to ask for anything. We just wanted to thank you. We saw the house, Mom. It's beautiful what you did with it. I finally understand why." I swallowed hard. For once, his words didn't carry guilt, they carried truth. "You finally grew up," I said, smiling faintly. He nodded. "Yeah, I did. Took me long enough." We hugged, not like strangers, not like enemies, but like a mother and son finding their way back through the ashes. And in that moment, I knew, sometimes, love's greatest lesson comes wrapped not in warmth, but in cold. Because only then do you learn how to build your own fire. I stood outside for what felt like hours. my body stiff from the cold, but my mind strangely calm. Sometimes, when everything shatters, your heart stops trying to fight back. It just observes. From the street, I could see the silhouettes moving behind the curtains. Laughter, wine glasses clinking, the faint glimmer of a Christmas tree. They were having dinner, my dinner, using my tablecloth, my ornaments, the silverware I had polished just the night before. The betrayal sat deep in my gut, but there was something else growing beside it. Clarity. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a statement. They wanted me to feel disposable. So, I decided right there. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't beg, and I definitely wouldn't let them win by seeing me broken. I turned, pulled my coat tighter, and walked away. Each step crunching against the frozen ground. Each one taking me further from the life I had been blind to for too long. I spent that night in my car, the engine off, my breath fogging the glass, the radio quietly playing old carols that used to warm me. I stared at my reflection in the side mirror, puffy eyes, trembling lips, but there was a fire in them. I whispered to myself, you raised a family, built a home, and gave them everything. If they could lock you out, they've already lost more than you have. Morning came pale and silent. I drove to a small diner on the edge of town, where the smell of coffee and pancakes wrapped around me like comfort. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes, smiled and said, "Rough night, honey?" I almost laughed. "Something like that," I said. She poured me coffee, and for the first time in months, I felt human again. Over that cup of coffee, a plan began forming. Not out of revenge, but justice. Everything in that house, every single thing, was mine. The mortgage, the deed, the bills, all in my name. My late husband, God rest his soul, had made sure of that. He always said, if they forget who made this home possible, remind them quietly. And that's exactly what I intended to do. I drove to the bank that morning and opened a new account. Then to the utilities company, electricity, water, internet, all under my name. I smiled faintly as I signed the forms to suspend service temporarily due to maintenance. The lady at the desk asked, "When would you like these services to resume?" I replied, "When respect returns to that house." By the time I left the third office, the first snowflakes had started to fall again. I pulled into a quiet motel for the night, made myself a cup of tea, and opened the small box I always kept in my purse. My husband's old watch, a few family photos, and the house keys. I held the keys in my hand, turning them slowly. They felt heavy now, like the weight of years of love and neglect combined. That night, I didn't cry. I wrote instead. I made a list, what I owned, what I had given, what they had taken. Then I wrote a short note. You chose to lock me out on Christmas Eve. Now I'm giving you space to enjoy what's left of what you thought was yours. I didn't sign it. They'd know. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "James, I need to make some quick property adjustments." He paused. "Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right?" I smiled faintly. "Just some overdue house cleaning." Within an hour, we had drafted the notice, transfer of utilities, account holds, and an official statement that the house would be under review for refinancing. Translation: their comfort was about to freeze, just like the night they left me outside. By evening, I was back in town, parked just far enough from the house to see the flicker of candlelight. I imagined their confusion as the power went out. The heater, the Wi-Fi, the dishwasher, all silent. I didn't feel joy exactly, but I did feel peace. Not the kind that comes from getting even, but from finally standing up for yourself. When my phone rang later that night, I saw my daughter's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom?" She sounded panicked. "The power's out. The house is freezing. And the bill company says everything's in your name. What's happening?" I waited a moment before answering softly. "Oh, I thought you didn't want me involved in your house anymore." "Mom, this isn't funny," she said, her tone shaky. "We have kids here." I took a deep breath. "And I had a mother's heart," I replied, "until you locked it outside last night." There was silence. I could almost hear her realizing what she'd done. Then a whisper, "Mom, I'm sorry. But apologies without change are just words." I said calmly, "You and your husband have 2 days to figure things out. The bills, the house, everything. Until then, maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to be left in the cold." And with that, I hung up. The snow kept falling, covering the town in a white stillness. I sat there for a while, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the glow from their windows dimming as the temperature dropped. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just whispered to the night, "Merry Christmas." The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls. My daughter, my son-in-law, even my grandchildren's nanny had called. For a moment, guilt tried to creep in. The same guilt that had kept me quiet for years. But I stopped it cold. I reminded myself of that freezing night, of standing on the porch while they laughed behind the curtains. No mother deserved that. No human being did. I took a slow breath and decided to go for a walk before calling anyone back. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I wandered through the park near the motel. Children were building snowmen, their laughter ringing through the air. One little boy offered me a small snowball, giggling, "For you, Grandma." I smiled and thanked him, feeling my heart soften just a little. Maybe there was still warmth left in this world. I had just been looking in the wrong place. When I finally returned to my car, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my son-in-law. His voice was clipped and frustrated. "You can't just cut everything off like that, Margaret. We have responsibilities. We have kids." I interrupted him calmly. "So did I, Ethan. I had responsibilities too. I raised your wife. I worked double shifts. I kept that roof over your heads even when your job couldn't. Don't talk to me about responsibilities." He stammered, trying to find his footing. "This isn't right. You're punishing the whole family for one mistake." "One mistake?" I said softly, the anger simmering beneath my calm voice. "You both planned a Christmas dinner, invited your friends, and locked me out. That wasn't a mistake, Ethan. That was a choice." He went quiet. I could almost hear the regret forming in his silence. Finally, he said, "What do you want from us?" I looked out the window at the frozen trees. "Respect," I said simply. Just that. But I see now that respect isn't something I should beg for. It's something I should demand. I ended the call before he could answer. That was the first time in years I had hung up on someone without apologizing afterward. It felt strange and empowering. By evening, I decided to drive by the house again, not to gloat, but to make peace with what had been. The road was quiet, the air crisp. When I pulled up, I saw my daughter outside, wrapped in a blanket, her cheeks red from the cold. The kids were bundled up in the car, their breath fogging the windows. She turned when she saw my car, and for a moment, I saw not defiance, but desperation. She walked up slowly, eyes glistening. "Mom, please. It's freezing inside. The kids are crying." Her voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly she didn't look like the woman who had snapped at me the night before. She looked like my little girl again. I stepped out of the car, keeping my voice steady. "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why did you lock me out?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It was stupid," she said quickly. "I was angry. I felt like you were judging me for everything. I thought if I pushed you away, maybe I could finally prove I could handle my own life." I shook my head slowly. "You don't prove independence by humiliating the people who raised you." She covered her face, sobbing quietly. I know, Mom. I messed up so badly." I stood there for a long moment before I spoke again. "You're my daughter," I said softly, "and I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean I let you treat me like I don't exist. What happened last night changed something in me. I'm not the same mother who stayed quiet just to keep the peace." Her lips trembled. "Please, can we go inside? Just to talk?" I nodded, finally. Just to talk. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house hit me like a memory. The scent of burnt candles, half-eaten food, and something bitter, regret maybe, hung in the air. I glanced at the decorations, once symbols of joy, now reminders of everything that had broken. We sat at the kitchen table, She held her cup with both hands, trying to stop them from shaking. "I told Ethan everything," she said quietly. "He feels awful too. He didn't stop me last night. He just stood there. I think he was scared to argue with me." I sipped my tea. "And what did you learn from all this?" She hesitated. "That pride doesn't keep you warm," she whispered. "And silence doesn't fix what's broken." I nodded slowly. "Then maybe this was the lesson you needed." We sat in silence for a long time, the clock ticking softly in the background. She looked up suddenly. "Mom, can we start over?" I looked around the kitchen, the photos, the laughter that used to fill these walls, the echoes of a home that had lost its way. "Starting over isn't just about saying sorry," I said. "It's about rebuilding trust. I'll turn everything back on, but this house won't run the same way again. If I stay here, things change. And if I leave, you take over everything, including the bills." She nodded quickly, relief flooding her face. "Yes, of course. Anything." I smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time we finally learn how to share a home again." Later that night, as the lights flickered back on, my granddaughter came running down the hall and hugged me tight. "Grandma, you're home!" she cried. That small voice, that innocent joy, it melted every piece of ice left in my heart. I hugged her back and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart, I'm home." But deep down, I knew home would never mean the same again, because now they understood what it took to lose it. The days that followed were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The tension that once filled every corner of the house had softened into something humbler, like the fragile peace that settles after a storm. My daughter and Ethan kept their voices low, their movements gentle. For the first time in a long while, I could feel they were choosing their words with care. One morning, I woke up to the sound of soft clinking in the kitchen. When I walked in, I saw my daughter making breakfast. Not for herself or her husband, but for me. The table was set neatly, the smell of pancakes filling the air. She turned when she heard me and smiled nervously. "Good morning, Mom. I thought maybe you'd like to eat before heading out." Her voice trembled slightly, like a child's after confessing a mistake. I sat down quietly, watching her pour syrup over the stack of pancakes. "You remember when you were 10, I said softly, "and you burned your first pancake? You cried like it was the end of the world." She laughed weakly. "And you made me eat it anyway," said it builds character. I smiled, the faintest warmth tugging at my chest. "I did. Maybe that's what this Christmas was about too. A burnt pancake of a memory. Ugly, hard to swallow. But maybe it builds something better in the end." Her eyes softened. "It already has," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I took you for granted for too long." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "I know, sweetheart, but apologies mean more when they come with change." And for once, I saw it. The change. It was in the way she looked at me, not with the impatience of someone tolerating an old woman, but with the tenderness of a daughter rediscovering her mother. Ethan entered the kitchen then, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Good morning, Margaret," he said. I wanted to apologize too. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped it before it went that far." I met his eyes. "You were quiet when silence hurt the most," I said, not unkindly. "But maybe now you understand that silence can also destroy trust." He nodded, his face flushed with genuine remorse. "We do, and we'll make it right." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Over the next few days, I watched small shifts take place. My daughter asking for help instead of demanding it. Ethan taking time off work to spend with the children. The kids laughing freely again. The house began to feel alive, not in the way it used to be, but in a gentler, more grounded sense. One evening, as I was reading by the fireplace, my granddaughter climbed into my lap. "Grandma," she asked, "why were you sleeping in a hotel on Christmas? Mommy said you needed a break." I smiled faintly. "Something like that, sweetheart. Grown-ups sometimes forget how to be kind. And when they do, the best way to remind them is by showing what life feels like without kindness." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "So, your break made Mommy nicer?" I chuckled softly. "Maybe it did." She grinned, satisfied with that answer, and nestled closer, Her warmth seeped through me, and I realized that, despite everything, I hadn't lost what mattered most. The love had been buried under pride and misunderstanding, but it was still there, still alive. That night, as snow began to fall again outside, I stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea. The lights on the roof twinkled gently, and for the first time since that dreadful Christmas Eve, I felt peace. It wasn't just about being right anymore. It was about reclaiming my place, not as the family's caretaker or their safety net, but as a woman with boundaries, self-respect, and dignity. I had learned something that night. Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting, and absence can teach what presence never could. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my daughter, handwritten, the kind of letter people don't send anymore. Inside, her words were raw and real. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how much you've given us, not just money or shelter, but love, forgiveness, and patience. I'm ashamed of how blind I was to it. You taught me to stand strong, but I forgot that strength isn't just independence, it's gratitude too. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve you. By the end of the letter, tears had blurred the ink. I held it close to my chest, whispering, "You finally understand." That was all I had ever wanted. Not revenge, not guilt, just understanding. Months passed, and winter gave way to spring. The snow melted, but the lesson stayed. My daughter and Ethan visited more often, not out of obligation, but out of love. Sometimes I'd go to their house for dinner. Sometimes they'd come to mine. We didn't talk about that night anymore. We didn't need to. It had carved its own quiet scar into our story, one that healed us both in strange, necessary ways. One evening, my daughter looked at me as we cleared the table. "You know, Mom," she said with a gentle smile, "every time I see the lights on the porch, I think about that Christmas. I think about how close I came to losing you." I smiled faintly. Sometimes you have to lose comfort to find gratitude. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You were right to lock us out that night. It saved our family." I looked out at the evening sky, its soft pink glow stretching across the horizon. "I didn't do it to save the family," I said quietly. "I did it to save myself. But maybe, in the end, it saved us all." The wind brushed against the window, carrying the faint echo of laughter from outside. Children playing, neighbors talking, life moving on. And as I stood there, I realized that some stories don't end with forgiveness or revenge. Some end with peace, the quiet kind that doesn't need words or applause. That Christmas Eve had broken something in me. But sometimes, things have to break before the light can find its way through the cracks. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the woman standing in the cold, waiting to be let in. I was the one who he